Welcome back to the Faith Forward podcast. John Ackerman, Brian Bales, and we're in the second week of this series that we've just started this season about the power of a name, the names of God, and not only what they teach us about him academically, but the way that they help us to better connect with him relationally, because we're truly coming to understand him better as he says he is, not just as we've thought him to be.
Yeah.
And so, Brian, last week we talked about the name of God, Yahweh, as God introduces himself to Moses in the beginning of Exodus. And so coming off of that now, for the next several weeks, we're going to continue to dig into the various ways that God introduces himself to his people. So you want to tell us a little bit about what you're probably going to tell us on Sunday?
Yeah, and so the question behind every time that I speak, and it'll be true when other people speak as well, is are we living in light of who God says he is, or are we living in light of who we think he is? Now, hopefully, who we think he is lines up with who he says he is, but that's not always true in life. And so when we look at the names of God, we understand, especially in biblical times in that culture, names communicated something, not just to a particular group that was in a small circle like a family or a clan or a tribe, but also outwardly to everyone else. And so when God names himself in Scripture. Remember, all Scripture is God-breathed. So whether it's Moses attaching a name or whether it was someone else attaching a name or God himself revealing it through Exodus chapter 3, it is God, right? Because it is inspired in that way. And when we get today into the book of Exodus again in chapter 34, God, describes himself again with an interesting word, jealous. And I think that's the tension that I tried to walk through on Sunday that we're going to walk through up front here is, does God mean what we think he means? That's really it. Are we living light of who he says he is or who we think he is? And this is one that I think is really important to understand, that if we don't have the right context of who God says he is with that word jealousy, we're going to walk away with some problematic thoughts and some problematic things to live. So one of the things that I just started out with really clearly on Sunday is that when God is jealous, it doesn't mean he's selfish in the way that we think or envious in the way that we think. This is not about him having a sense of resentment against someone or something, but rather a better term is zealous, where he's passionate towards something and it's good. And the reason why he is we talked about it, is that he is passionate about wanting what's best for us. Because anytime we choose to follow something or someone other than him, it is an idol. And in that context, in Exodus chapter 34, there would be the types of things that we today, removed thousands of years later, would call like real idols, statues and that sort of stuff. But I don't like that term, real idols, because we have idols today. They just look a lot different. Yeah. We don't bow down to a golden calf called Baal, or they mentioned the Asherah poles. Asherah was the female counterpart to Baal, the male counterpart, the goddess of fertility, and they had poles that they would set up to recognize that God. We don't do that today, at least not in the United States of America that I'm aware of. There may be a strange place in America that I'm unaware of, but none that I'm aware of. But we do bow down to a lot of things. And God wants to have what's best for us, and so a life that's following him, that's what's best. And so he's zealous for that relationship that we, as we'll talk about, have committed to as well. But also he's zealous for his name out there, and we'll talk about that, and I did talk about that, of preserving the truth about how he's communicated to the world, because he sent Jesus to die for everyone. Certainly he cares about those of us who have already accepted him, but he wants other people to accept him too, because he wants what's best for them. And so we walk through that in Exodus 34, and we'll kind of talk some more about what it looks like to take that and move it forward in our life.
Yeah. And so today we're gonna delay the practical application for just a few minutes, because, like you were just talking about, this issue of God being jealous is potentially challenging for us in 2024 because of how we think of that word and what we would associate with someone who self-identifies as being jealous. We'd be like, I don't know if I necessarily want to be close to you if you recognize you have this issue.
Yeah, I was trying to think about this in the last week or so when I was looking at the text. It might have happened, but I can't recall a personal scenario, let's say in the last 10 years, but I can't recall it before the 10 years either, but my memory's not so good, where I've ever seen someone attach the term jealous and mean that in a positive way.
Right.
And so when you see that word attached to God, and we understand that God has revealed himself in Scripture as perfect and holy and right, and then we see a word like that attached to him, there's some tension.
Yeah. And so we're going to start by making sure that we've clearly defined our terms. And for some of us, and I think about the experiences that I had in my classroom with my students for all these years, is many cases we don't intend to be conversationally lazy, but we interchange and we use words interchangeably that don't actually mean the same thing, but we're able to get by in casual conversation because we basically understand what the other person meant in that moment.
Yeah.
And so, for example, envy and jealousy have gotten conflated with each other because they've been used so interchangeably over the years, but they actually have fundamentally different definitions. Envy is when I want desperately what someone else has, but I don't. Or I want it so bad that I don't want them to have it if I can't have it.
That's right.
But envy is fundamentally centered around what I feel I lack. Whereas jealousy is fundamentally centered around things that are mine, but that I fear may be taken from me or that may be lost or something like that. So when we talk about God, though, and we talk about God being jealous, one, we have to center ourselves in the true definition of jealousy, that this is about something that God already has.
Yeah.
But then we have to talk about the difference between selfish jealousy, which is like that little toddler who has all the toys, and then the little friend comes over and the parents are like, all right, share. And he's like, no, these are mine. We're not talking about that kind of jealous God who doesn't want to share his toys. So tell us a little bit about what God means by zealous or righteous jealousy.
So if we think about jealous, think about it having a deep, I found this word and I decided to use it. It's not a word we use a lot in our language, fervor, though. I think it's such a unique word that most of us, when we hear it, we get it.
Yeah.
That is when God says that he is jealous towards someone. And so when we think about our English language, and if, say, you went to your Word document and you typed in jealousy and then you right-clicked to synonyms, you could see an example that is zealous, which is a positive aspect of it. You could also, by the way, see an example, like you mentioned, envy, which is a negative. And this is where sort of the language challenge comes up. And one of the things that I was trying to drive home a little bit on Sunday, and then I'll drive home here, is that one of the things to be really careful of, especially in those moments if we read something in Scripture and there seems to be a disconnect, right? So here's the disconnect. When you look up in a typical online dictionary, or if you have old school Merriam-Webster's physical copy for those of us of a particular age, one of the very first definitions you're going to read of jealousy is a feeling of resentment against someone. So if you take that definition and you apply it to God, it's saying that God has a feeling of resentment or bitterness towards someone. Now, there's a problem, though, because there are several scriptures, not the least of which in Job chapter 5, as well as in 2 Timothy chapter 2, where God, through the power of the Holy Spirit, through the author, says this: don't be bitter. Don't have that. Don't have a sense of resentment. So if that is what jealous means in this context, what God is doing later on when he tells us not to do that, it says this: this is okay for my character, but it's not okay for your character. Right. And there's a problem in that, because in definition, resentment is called as bad. And so how can a good God do a bad thing? So we've got to walk through that. And the best way to walk through it, and we were talking about this off podcast, is just practically something that maybe right now in this moment I won't take your faith forward, but maybe in the future is this, is that when you find a word in Scripture, you've heard me say this over and over again, context matters to it. And one of the greatest ways we get something out of context is we take an English dictionary of 2000 and whatever, and we apply it to a context that was back then. And so can I encourage you, if you need a copy, there's lots of them online, or go buy a copy, go buy what's known as a theological biblical dictionary. And that will be better, more helpful, because if you read that under this idea of jealous, then you lead with envious. Then you lead with, not envious, see, I got that wrong. Then we lead with zealous, right? Yeah. And so he is zealous for me. He is zealous for this relationship. He's not envious. You made this point in the notes. I thought it was great. If we define God as being envious, it means he's lacking something. and he's not lacking of anything, right? You made this point. He doesn't want what we have because he gave it to us, right? If I think of that toddler example you used, I don't want that rattle. I gave you that rattle.
Right.
Like if I wanted the rattle, I didn't need to give it to you, right? I didn't like all of a sudden test you like, here, let me give you this to see if you would give me it back. It's not how this relationship works. And so I think it's really important we understand the difference between envy and zealous in those definitions. But then you mentioned this idea of selfish jealousy versus righteous jealousy. Talk to us about that.
Yeah. And so the phrase that came to mind for me was that God is zealous to keep what is rightfully his and to keep it good. And so, again, we look at the idea that God gave us everything, and more importantly, God gave us himself. And God created us to be with him. And so God's jealousy has nothing to do with stuff. It has everything to do with relationship, with connection, and to keep that good. That's what he's jealous for. It's the protection and the preservation of connection and relationship, and to keep that good. And when God uses the word good, this is just something I momentarily geek out on from time to time, so just bear with me.
I love the word I think you're about to use. It's a great word, by the way. It's one of my favorite Hebrew words.
It is, right? So you look at Genesis and the creation account, and when God creates things and then pronounces them good, it's the Hebrew word tov, T-O-V. Right. And it's not good just as in like quantitative goodness or qualitative goodness, but it's generative goodness. It's good that creates good that creates good. It's self-sustaining, regenerative, accumulating, multiplying good. It's good that is so good that it can't help make more good. That's what God is jealous for. It's the preservation of good.
I'm just going to leave it there. That preaches. That's good. But by the way, I did have a self-reflection moment. Am I a little bit of a geek that I just said out loud, that's my favorite Hebrew word? I just, I don't know. It's kind of like saying it's my favorite Marvel superhero. I mean, the biblical stuff is definitely better, but it does sort of, put me in a category in that way.
Occupational hazard.
If you want to know, by the way, some other favorite Hebrew words that I have, you could always send us an email, like the tease I'm about to give here, faithforward@cfcwired.org, and we might reveal them on this podcast
do a top 10 list sometime.
Yeah, there you go, top 10.
So we take that idea, though, of what God is jealous for is not stuff, it's us. It's connection, it's relationship. And he's jealous because he wants it to remain good, the kind of good that begets good, that begets good, that begets good. And so it brings us back to what is best, because God wants what is best for us, and God wants what is best for him. That what is best is always connected to who he is and who he says we are and what he wants to do in us and through us. And so I see this reflected most clearly with the sheer number of times that God says some version of, I will be your God and you will be my people. I will be your God and you will be my people. And he says this throughout the Old Testament in multiple places, and then the New Testament writers hearken back to this promise, and you actually see it at the end of the story in Revelation 21 as part of the promise of heaven coming to earth and God dwelling with his people. God reminds us through the Apostle John that the reason I'm doing this is because I always promised you that I would be your God and you would be my people forever. No matter what, this covenant that God makes, starting with Abraham and sustaining through sheer determination sometimes on his own part, all the way to the end of the story, this covenantal promise of relationship is based in this reality that he says, I will be your God no matter what. No matter what. This is what he says to Abraham in Genesis 18. This is the everlasting covenant. I will always be your God and the God of your descendants after you. And then 2 verses later, Genesis 18, verse 9, then God said to Abraham, your responsibility is to obey the terms of the covenant. You and all your descendants have this continual responsibility. And for me, it's this piece, these 2 verses, that help me better understand God's jealousy in this relationship, is that he committed forever to be in a relationship with us, no matter what. It's not a contract, it's a covenant.
Yep.
Contract is I do my part, you do your part, and if one or both parties fails to do their part, contract is broken, we walk away.
Yeah.
Covenant is there is nothing that you could do that would make me walk away from this. There is nothing that can be done that would make me step away from this. And so God's entering into a covenantal promise. I will be your God no matter what. There's not a thing that's going to be able to change this because I am committing myself wholeheartedly to it. And you have a part because Abraham enters into a covenant with God. Abraham covenants with God, even as God covenants with Abraham. And that means that we have both said yes to this. And so that means God gets to be jealous. He gets to be zealously protective of something that's his because we've agreed we're his.
Yeah, it's not like God, went out, so to speak, and trapped us into something. He invited us into something.
Yeah, you're mine
he
now.
invited us into something, and we agreed. And you were making a comment earlier on, and if you've listened to the podcast before, John and I talk a lot pre-podcast, and then sometimes when we were talking off podcast, it seems like something I say at least 3 times. By the way, maybe we should add that as another name of our podcast. We're getting a very deep list. This is at the lowest. Yeah. But this idea of you made an example of a marriage relationship and the difference between when you're just hanging out as friends to then it moves to dating, then it works to marriage. At differing levels of that relationship, there's differing levels of bilateral commitment. And so at differing places, zealousness for that is appropriate or inappropriate. In fact, sometimes earlier on, if you're just friends and you're hanging out, no one's defined the relationship. I used to say that all the time for the young adults. I used to pastor the DTR. Jealousy at that point was envy.
Yeah.
If you've not defined it. But if both people have agreed, we are in this, at some level, and then one of them goes out and they're hanging out in a group of friends and they start paying inappropriate amount of attention to someone else, and that other person is zealous for that. No, you've committed that to me. That's right. In fact, we should be concerned if we have that sort of relationship with someone and we go out and we're doing something inappropriate, we should be concerned about that, number one. But number two, if the person we're with doesn't care.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it can be really easy to put God in a box if we don't understand the context and say, well, he's just being selfish and he wants all his toys. Well, think of it the other way. Would the rather option be that he loves you all this much, but he doesn't care what's best for you?
Yeah.
Because that's the thing, because I'm your God and you are my people. The other stuff behind it is that think about who he is. We'll talk about this revealing of himself more and more in the names, but he reveals himself to be the all-knowing, all-powerful, all-caring, all-loving, all-present God of the universe. And so by definition, when we see that through Scripture, he knows what's best for us. That's why Jeremiah 29:11, which oftentimes is taken out of context, really fits here. I know the plans that I have for you, plans to prosper you and have a future. But those are connected to this idea of how you are living out this reality towards me. John chapter 10, verse 10, Jesus makes it very clear why he came. The enemy wants to kill and to steal and destroy. I came that you might have life and life to the full. And what we need to grasp in this is that God himself is the definer, and the knowledge and the power and the loving God that he is, who knows what that life is supposed to be like. So he's zealous for us to be in this relationship properly, not because he wants to have all the stuff, because he wants what's best for us. And I know I'm jumping ahead, but it's just,
And it reminds me that one of the things that God says so frequently, especially through the Old Testament prophets, is you adulterous people.
Yeah.
Right. And again, that can feel a little heavy-handed or unfair, but it's coming out of the reality of there was a commitment, not a contract, a covenant. I will always be your God, and you will always be my people. I've chosen you, and you've chosen me. That has to matter, and it's that protective nature. It's that zealousness that God has. It's not a one-way pursuit, though he is always pursuing. There was a mutual agreement.
Yeah. So if it's okay, can I go to the tension of polytheism?
Yeah.
That sounds like a really weird question to just throw in the midst of it. One of the things that we need to understand is that when Jacob entered in to meet his son Joseph into Egypt, 400 years it started the captivity. It was different types. By the time of the end of the time that the Israelites were in Egypt, it was difficult. At the time of Joseph, it was just passive in that way. 400 years are there. Jacob enters with 70 people. They exit with 2 million people. And the predominant culture that they've been exposed to at that point was Egyptian polytheism, wherein for many of them, they would have looked at the God of the Israelites, who reveals himself in Exodus chapter 3 as Yahweh, as a God among gods. Some of us get really freaked out about that because we know truth past. They were discovering the truth in the moment. I don't know if any of you have seen what's known as information degradation over time. You know, you do the telephone game or whatever. Now imagine a group of people that started with 70 not doing a really good job of communicating the truth of who God is over a period of 400 years to 2 million people. And you won't be surprised why so many people thought to themselves, hey, guess what? There are other gods out there. And God made that covenant with Abraham. A whole lot of people who were born weren't aware or forgot or didn't follow the covenant. And so what's happening in Exodus chapter 34 is God is reminding them of the covenant, renewing it in Exodus chapter 34, by the way. Ironically, it's the second time this is happening because I said on Sunday, the first time that Moses was up on top of the mountain with God, he is apparently up there too long for the Israelites' taste. So what they did was they created a god and they started convincing Aaron to worship it. And so, wow, I mean, catch this, it's crazy. I know Moses is talking to God himself on the top of the mountain about the covenant that they're making and they belong to him and him alone. And while this is happening, they're dancing down. And when I say dancing, this is not how we need to think about our typical dance at a wedding. This is some very inappropriate things that are going on around, by the way, a false god. Well, God's right there. And so now God doesn't, by the way, here's the thing, because God made a covenant there to them that he will always be their God, it's why he doesn't kill them. He doesn't. From a contextual concept of that day, know this, that a God, there's only one true God, but in their belief, a God would have been in right to do and to kill them. They would have believed that. He shows himself again to be different. So now he's back up on top of the mountain because Moses, this is where I really relate with Moses. I relate with Moses in lots of places, but I can be someone who throws something down when I'm really mad. And so Moses, when he discovers this coming down the first time, throws the 10 Commandments down and they break. So Exodus, he's back 34. He's back on the mountain, 2 more stone tablets. He's having that conversation. And God is delivering more and more understanding. But listen, you've allowed this culture to rub off on you. I am helping you understand what it really means to follow me. This is why I'm doing this. And so when we look at this text, here's the tension I want us to look at when we talk about idols. How have we let our culture? We may not consider ourselves Egyptian polytheists, wherein God is one God amongst many, to where God had to redefine the relationship better with the Israelites. But my guess is, my confident guess is that many of us have things in our life that are taking the place of God. Their name may not be Baal, it may not be Asherah, but it may be something else. And what God wants is to help us understand that all the things that we buy into that tell us that they can deliver what only God can deliver, number one, they can't, and number two, they're idols. And that's why he's jealous. He wants what's best for us, and he wants us to get rid of these idols. And that's really kind of when we're making this shift, helping us identify what some of these are.
And so I think it's helpful if all of us realize that we all will need to make essentially the same journey as the Israelites, because all of us have been born metaphorically in Egypt.
Yeah, it's a great point.
And we're not just talking about, in a country where a national religion, we're not talking about that. We're talking about you have been born in a worldly context where you have learned God plus in a variety of ways. You have learned how to try to make life happen using whatever means and whatever tools were available to you. And God's desire is to lead all of us out of these places of captivity and idolatry into the promised land. And for me, it helps me make even more sense of what Jesus says when Jesus comes out of the wilderness after being baptized, the wilderness, the temptation. And in Luke, he comes into the temple, he picks up the scroll of Isaiah, and he says, this is why I've come. I've come to help people that don't realize they're blind see. I've come to bring captives out of captivity. I've come to bring prisoners out of darkness. That's you. Right? That's you. That's me. That's you. That's all of us. Right? We all have our own Exodus journey that has to be taken, where God takes us out of the place that we thought we knew him and brings us to the place where we actually experience him. And along the way, God realizes that there are many things and many people that might promise what only he can deliver. You said this on Sunday. And he does not want us to have less than himself. Because anything that promises what only God can deliver, that's an idol. And you mentioned at the beginning, we're not talking about gold and silver statues and tall poles, but we're talking about the things that have pulled our heart in the direction of, I can do this for you. If I have blank, whatever it is, then I'll be okay, even if God doesn't come through. Right? That's the heart of our idolatry. If I don't have blank, it'll still be okay, even if God doesn't show up. And so we've got some practical things now. Now we're into the practical section of our show, but it felt like we needed to lay some groundwork in terms of language and understanding so that we would better be able to position ourselves and these hopefully helpful comments. So Brian, there's some practical things we can do. Take a self-inventory of our idols, ask others about our idols, and ask God about our idols. So why don't you start us off with some of the practical things that we can do in the self-analysis category to see where we may be in bondage to idols and not realize it.
So in the self-analysis category, there's an assumption here that we know what to go and look for. And so when I'm talking about this idea that we have idols, I've heard this term used, and maybe you have as well, it's called the known unknowns. And this is what that means. You know there's something there, it's just unknown what it is. For many of us, we may even have the unknown unknown. We think we're fine, and God wants to reveal that. So whether it's the known unknowns, this is a sort of a self-analysis inventory for us, or whether you think you're fine, I encourage you to sort of walk through some of these things, and it might reveal some things. So, am I aware of the things I'm relying on instead of God, or in addition to God, God plus? I love that. Like, if I have this relationship with you, God, plus this, I'm okay. Yeah. And here's like 3 quick things as I was thinking about it. 1, look at your calendar. Your calendar often reveals to you trends. It reveals to you what you see as important, and you're able to dig into that. So let me give you an example. Say you have children and you're running them all around to sports all the time. It doesn't mean that sports is your idol, and it doesn't mean that children are your idol. It means you spend a lot of time there, and you begin to then ask the question then, what am I doing in this moment to be more like Jesus? What's Jesus doing in me in that moment? It invites you into that moment, because here's the thing about idols. There can be some seemingly good things that we're doing that are actually idols, and some things that seem neutral that are developing ourselves. So for example, you could look at your calendar and it says, I've spent 30 hours this week at a church building doing stuff. And that can be an idol. In fact, by the way, what we do is supposed to come from our being, not the other way around. Jesus in Matthew chapter 7 talks about people who did a whole lot of good stuff, that what we call church stuff, that they were only idols because they did them without him. They did them without him. And so I'm not saying that what is on your calendar per se tells you it's right or wrong, but it will show you trends where you invite God into that. And there it is. Ask God. We're going to tell you that again. Podcast name number 2, if you're keeping a list there. So, check your calendar. Here's something to do. Set up a random alarm. And by random, if your phone enables you to do random, do fully random, but just pick different times of the day and then forget about it. And then when that random alarm goes off, do a thought inventory. What have I been thinking about the last 15 minutes to an hour? And just write it down. Sometimes if it happens to work, it's going to be all work stuff. If it happens so you need to vary a little bit and see if you begin to see some trends. And not just what am I thinking about, but how am I thinking about? If your alarm goes off at 2 p.m. and you say, well, I'm always thinking about work, well, that's not a bad thing. It doesn't mean you have an idol of work. How are you thinking about work? Are you inviting God in this process? Are you saying, God, I need your wisdom? Are you saying, God, you need to show me this? Are you acting in a godly way in that moment? Here's a good example. If I'm freaking out about something, instead of trusting God because I'm living out of my sin of control, not out of trust to God in that moment, I know that internally, that maybe other people may or may not know that. And when that alarm goes off, I'm like, oh, that's helpful. So maybe do that. Here's something, third, practically. We've said this before, I'll say it again. Frankly, there is no better, in my opinion, way to get to the heart of how much God is at the front of our life than looking at our bank account. And again, hear me say this. I'm not saying when you look at your bank account that your bank account, if you have this big trend towards, eating out, that means that you have an idol of eating out. What I'm saying is when you see these trends, invite God into it. Say you happen to be in a place where you spend a lot of money on clothes. I'm not critiquing that. The question is why? Well, why do you do that? What are you wanting from that? Is just something that, that's the work environment and where you go, and that's how, if you happen to be an attorney and you're listening to this, great. You probably have to show up in a suit if you go into court. You just probably do. Those aren't cheap, okay? But at the same time, if you're showing up in a suit that says, because I want people to think I'm this sort of person, then there may be some insight of whether or not your clothing may be an idol. So I don't want us to just break it down as simple as saying, well, I'm going to look at this and look at time or look at my thoughts or look at my bank account and say, that shows me the idols. No, it'll show you trends where you invite God in to see, are there idols in there? So that's self-inventory. But here's the interesting thing, and Jon, I know you know this to be true because you have people in your community circle. I know this to be true. I have people in my community circle as well. Sometimes other people see things in us faster, and that's one of the reasons we call community such an important thing. We're not meant to live this alone. We can ask them, and that's a scary thing sometimes.
It is. Yeah, we are often far more transparent to others than we are to ourselves. One of the challenges of doing a self-analysis is we just might not be self-aware. But the other challenge is we may just be really good at rationalization. There's a reason for everything I do. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't do it, is what I tell myself.
No, it's same conversation in my head.
And so having other people around us, but here's the catch. The people that truly love you are probably not going to walk up to you on a regular basis and say, hey, can I tell you about all the things that I see in your life that I have questions about? That's a really helpful place to invite people to not only say, in general, hey, if you ever see anything, let me know. But to carve out time in the midst of conversation and go, now in this moment, I would like to ask you a question. And if you have immediate thoughts, great. And if you need some time to think, then I would like to schedule a follow-up time so that we have this conversation, because I value my own personal health and I value the health of our relationship and I value the insight and the perspective that you have on my life. God, that's terrifying.
Yeah.
That is terrifying.
Well, this is going to kind of merge into a little bit our next sort of examples that we're going to give, but you've confessed this here on the podcast. I've confessed this here on the podcast. Here is to illustrate, if you don't know what that's like. Someone in my life recently, I invited them, into my life and just made a comment, something like this: you don't like to receive help. You don't like it. Like I do. I feel uncomfortable when people do things for me, whether I need them or not. I feel super uncomfortable, I think, sometimes if I know I'm in need and someone does them. I feel even, like if someone just says something nice and they're like, oh, here's what, I'm like, I'm still lurking on what it looks like to receive. And this person pointed it out in a way that I thought I was covering it pretty well, because I'm very deflective naturally with things. My wife, for those of you who are fans, call me Chandler from time to time. I try to use humor to deflect my lack of comfortability in a moment or that sort of thing. And I was doing something like that, and this person just sort of gently called me out, because not necessarily at that time, because truthfully I didn't appreciate it at that time, but I had other times, right? And he was taking me up on this. They saw at that moment I was deflecting, right? And I was at that point, and they said, well, what does this have to do with idols? There's the connection, because I feared something was happening that made me uncomfortable, and was say in a second, What we fear often, the opposite of it is where the idol is. So hold that illustration when someone was going, hey, you're deflecting, Brian, and know that our friends, our community around that. And then, of course, we do say this. Say self-inventory doesn't show anything up. Maybe our community doesn't show up anything. That doesn't mean we're done. Mm-hmm. Ask God.
Ask God.
Ask him, and then write down what you hear. And then if you're not sure what you're hearing, invite your community into it. Invite that sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. Because God's God, he loves us enough to answer our prayers. Yeah. And he'll do it in a kind way. He's not going to be there going like, I'm so glad you've asked. I've been waiting to hit you with the bat of condemnation.
Yeah, here's my list.
Yeah. No. He's like, I'm glad you've asked.
Yeah.
Because I want what's best for you.
Yeah, and it brings us back to why God is jealous.
Mm-hmm.
Is he's zealous about protecting and preserving the good in the relationship, the good that he's placed in us, and the good that he's placed in us will often get hijacked by our idols.
Yeah.
And so the probably the most helpful self-assessment, maybe the most helpful insight that our friends can offer us, and especially the place to go with God, is what you just talked about. We often worship the opposite of what we fear. Mm-hmm. It's one of the expressions that has come out of our Encounter conference. It's something we spend some extensive time at that conference talking about, that we worship the opposite of what we fear. And so take a self-inventory of the things that I'm most afraid of. And I'm not necessarily talking about like snakes and spiders and things like that, but the things that seem most threatening to your life and well-being and the well-being of the things and the people you care most about.
So let me take that illustration I just used and flip it. Here's what was revealing for me. What I was fearing was not being able to take care of myself. Self-sufficiency is an idol of mine. Because I'm aware of this, God's helped me, he's continued to tear down the stronghold. At one point in my life, I said in my mind, and probably said out loud at some point, I have to depend upon myself. I can't depend upon anyone else. And so when someone brings me something even nice, it created this sort of fear in me, like, oh, do they think I need this? Or do they think this? Am I not? Mm-hmm. And again, hear me this, I'm not so cognizant of it in the moment that all of a sudden I can see that. This is something that's happened over years where God in his grace and kindness have helped me see that my aversion to certain things isn't as biblical as I thought it was. In fact, it's the opposite of that, because I'm fearing this because I have an idol of self-sufficiency.
Yeah.
And so that's an example, like what you fear helps you see your idol, because lots of times we don't see that. Like, if we fear being broke, it doesn't necessarily mean that we have a fear of money or have an idol of money. It may mean probably something deeper. We believe, like, for example, that security comes from money and security only comes from God.
Yep.
Or other things like that.
Yeah. So think about a few categories here. Health and beauty. If I am vigilant, whether it comes to exercise or nutrition or appearance, I don't have to fear death or sickness or aging. In other words, I don't need to trust God for my physical well-being, my attractiveness to others, my physical and medical health, if I have God plus. Mm-hmm. Knowledge. If I have expert knowledge, or if I just stay on top of the news so that I feel like I know what's going on in the world, I have the information, I have the facts, I don't have to fear embarrassment, I don't have to fear manipulation, I don't have to fear intimidation, right? The self-protective nature of knowledge as an idol, of nobody can fool me if I know all the things I need to know. God plus knowledge. Money, we've talked about pretty extensively already, and it could just be as simple as if I have X amount, then I don't need to worry about provision.
One of the tests that I gave myself a while back, I realized this, is that I understand inflation's kicked up. I understand all of that. But I remember what I used to think when I was 21. Mm-hmm. If I had X amount by the time I turned 30, there was a number. Like if I made this amount of money every year, I thought it'd be fine. And by the way, I would have been, and I would still be. Mm-hmm. But I also know if someone said, hey, this is the amount of money I want to offer you in the year of our Lord 2024, my natural tendency would be, not God, is this what you want me to do? Because you're my provider. Yep. But like, I couldn't do that. Yeah. And the answer might be, no, I can't. Yeah. But would I make that my own flesh, or would I go to God first?
Yeah. It's the draw of the lottery.
Yeah.
I would never have to worry again. It's God plus.
Yep.
Power or gifting or influence. I can make it happen on my own, even if God doesn't show up. I can control the world around me, even if God doesn't do what I think he should or what I want him to do.
Mm-hmm.
So God, it would be great if you would do these things that I want you to do, but even if you don't, and we've talked about this, even just with our gift of teaching, right? God, I really want what you want to say to come through to people. But even if you don't, I'm pretty sure I can say some decent things, right? If I have more trust in my gifting and ability than I do the necessity and the awareness of what God's doing and what God wants to do, it's God plus. Even with family, it's not that they are necessarily always an idol, but we can make our marriage an idol. We can make our children an idol. We can make our identity as a husband or as a father or as a wife or as a mother an idol. And here's where we're starting to get into some of our idols are actually very closely tied to not just provision around us, but protection of what's and who is inside of us. Mm-hmm. It's idols of identity. And so if I had this, then I would be someone who has value. Right? I remember that as I was going through long stretches of being single. If I was just married, then I would know who I am and I would have value. And part of the story that Brooke and I have experienced now over a decade plus of wanting to have kids is these attacks on us at an identity level of who we are is somehow deficient because we are not yet a mother and a father, that we are just a husband and a wife. And so it would be very easy to make an idol of having children, that things won't be okay until we have this thing. Same thing happens with accomplishments and with, the purpose that we feel like God has for our life. You talked about the sheer number of hours we can spend working at church, trying to do things for God, not just because we want to do them for God, but because of what that would mean about who we are, that would be someone who God would be proud of, someone that God would love, someone that God would value and validate. And it's yet another version of God plus. That God, you wouldn't actually love me or value me or validate me or appreciate me unless I was doing these things or had these things or was this kind of person. Those are some really helpful places to go searching for your idols or to allow other people, or especially God, to speak into your life and help highlight, hey, this thing that you're afraid of is having outsized control and influence that it was never meant to have.
But it's not, and John's not saying this is me reminding us all, it's not enough just to know what the idol is. Are we willing to do what God's asking us to do in the idol?
Yep.
The ultimate example in the New Testament is the rich young ruler.
Yep.
He comes to Jesus, and Jesus says, hey, this is your idol. This is what you need to go do. He's like, can't do it.
Yeah.
Can't do it. And so, again, this is one of these things that, to the extent that we hear God's voice, that's good, but that's only the start. It's what do we do with what God has to say? Yeah. Are we willing to obey him? Or are we willing then, after we obey him and things seem to go a little squirrely in our mind, are willing to rest in our obedience and not try to grab back and say, all right, I'm going to go back to this idol. I'm going to go back to this idol. So know this. And I think we've spent the vast majority of time, as we should, talking about this idea about God is jealous for this relationship. But there's one other aspect before we kind of wind up I want to make sure that we hear. God is also jealous for his name. In this way, we need to understand. The people of Israel were the covenantal people of God who were designed to be God's representation on earth. We as the church now in the New Testament are designed, for those who are believers, to be God's representational example on earth. So I started with this question: do we live in light of who God says he is or who we think he is? So we take that question that we've just asked outside of the realm of us that are believers, and we look at those people who don't have a relationship with God. The truth is, the vast majority of people draw their conclusion about who God is, not from who God says he is, but who the people of God act like he is. And one of the reasons why God was very jealous was not just for their best, but he was jealous for his name. He was jealous that he be represented well, can't even say that word, so that the world that he sent Jesus to die for would also come to know him. And there's some things you really need to understand this, that God is passionately zealous about his name being reflected well. And he's really passionately zealous about those of us who are claiming God's name to make sure that we represent his name well. Yeah. In the New Testament, you only see Jesus getting like angry, like righteous anger around one group of people. Mm-hmm. And those were people who claimed to be doing things in the name of God that were not representing God's name well. Yeah. I mean, like he flipped tables. He called them whited sepulchers, tombs full of dead men. He had some very direct words. And so one of the other reasons that God is jealous is not because he cares just for us. He's jealous and he's zealous because he cares for those people who don't have the relationship. Because not only is it best for us to be in relationship with God and he wants what's best for everyone. Yeah. And so when we think about some of these things that we choose to do, this isn't guilt, this isn't any of that. It actually is bigger than us. Yeah. It's what he's asking us to do. When Jesus says, you are the light of the world in the New Testament, his reflection is going back to that. He also says, I am the light of the world. So if you connect those two, he's saying your light is the moon and I am the sun. And people will draw conclusions about the moon, the sun, based upon what they see the moon and what we reflect well. And so just even as we think about that matters when it comes to our idols and why we should invite God into this moment to tear him down.
Yeah. Yeah. Awareness is not the same thing as freedom.
Yeah.
Right? Being healthier than we've ever been is not the same thing as being healthy. And so what God's invitation to us has always been is there's more. Third name of our podcast. I'm trying to hit them all today. Right? It's the recognition that God cares about preserving the integrity of his name, not to make himself look better than he is, but to make sure that he is authentically presented as he is, and that the same will be true of us, that we would see not only him clearly as he is, but we would see ourselves clearly, not only as we currently are, but as he intended us to be. And our idols are the things that we often don't see in our current state, and they are also the things that keep us from seeing ourselves as he says we are meant to be. Yep. And that's the importance of stepping into this space. And I'm reminded as I spent some time at one point looking through the genealogy of Jesus that's in Matthew 1. And that then caused me to go back into 1st and 2nd Kings and 1st and 2nd Chronicles and look at all these people who are identified as being in the family line of Jesus. And you hit this stretch where it's like bad king, worst king, good king. Bad king, worst king, good king. And the things that made not just the good kings, but the great kings great are not just the ones that recovered a lifestyle of focusing on God and worshiping God, but the greatest ones were the ones that went and tore down the high places, that not only agreed that God is who he says he is and we should worship him, but they actually went and they removed the idols. And those were the people that God highlighted in Jesus' genealogy in those sections of the scriptures in 1st and 2nd Kings and 1st and 2nd Chronicles as the people very much like David that were people after God's heart. Even Solomon, who usually gets the sustained reputation of incredible wisdom, incredible riches, incredible godliness, spent the end of his life as an idolater. Spent the end of his life worshiping God plus all kinds of other things. And it's a tragic end to what began as such an incredible legacy handed to him. But we look at the people that came after Solomon in the line of Jesus, and there were people that recognized not only who God was, but the truth of who God was calling them to be. And not only went to war for God, but went to war against the idols in their life. So that it would just be, you are my God, and I am your person. Yeah. And there's nothing else, because there's nothing else needed. And so that brings us to this space at the end of something that I'm probably going to remind us of in each of these weeks about the name of God, that the value of understanding these names of God comes in not just who God says he is. Let me say that again. The value of a name comes in understanding who God says he is rather than what we think he should do. And so this week, it might be easy to look at the flip side of what a jealous God might mean he should do, in which case we're just really trying to avoid getting smited or smote or whatever that is. That God is jealous, and so just do what he wants and no one gets hurt. That's not the goal of understanding that God is a jealous God. The goal of understanding that God is a jealous God is that God is zealously protective to keep this covenant relationship good. The kind of good that creates good, that begets good, that begets good. And that's how we get to know him as the God that will move heaven and earth and endure any number of indignities to preserve the goodness of the connection that he wants us to have, and the knowing him as he is, not just as we thought he was, and the knowing ourselves as he sees us, not just who we've come to believe we are. So with that said, anything else to add?
Just quickly, I was just adding on to something, that the reminder about tearing down the altars. It's one thing to step away from the idols. It's another thing to tear them down.
Yep.
And to ask God, not only help me step away, but help me tear them down. Because if we don't ask God to help him tear them down, the vision I have in my head is like a siren sitting out in the water calling to us at all times. We'll be there because it's where we'll naturally turn and we'll see them. And so it is a practical thing with the help of God, the help of your friends in your biblical community, to not just step away when God reveals them, but to do the necessary work to make it as difficult as possible to go back.
Yeah, refusing to tear down the idols is in and of itself a form of idolatry because, well,
I got a backup plan. It's my safety net.
If I need it? Yeah. So with that, again, thank you for letting us be on our journey. Thank you for being part of our journey. Thanks for letting us be part of yours. We so greatly appreciate this time that you let us spend in your day. So until next time, he's Brian. I'm Jon. We'll see you later.